Good day, learners, and welcome to the program on dealing with debtor excuses. My name is Craig Now, and I'm from a company called ICAN. We specialize in training, staffing, monitoring, and also advisory services. So we hope that you'll enjoy the program and that you'll participate. Feel free to message us if there's any questions, if you should you have any. And we're going to be dealing with quite a hot topic in the collections industry, and we know you'll have some fun and enjoy it. And if not, give us feedback. Here are the top 10 in no particular order. We're going to deal with them in a lot of detail because we believe that there's a lot of benefit if you as an agent can understand the complexities around some of the the actual excuses. Some of them are quite, let's say, it's very much regulated. Where others, we're going to share with you some tips to deal with some of them because some of them are quite emotive and some we have to give the debtors the benefit that they are quite very skillful in being dishonest and using these excuses. And that's going to be the fine line in the training. In at what point do you kind of make a call that the debtor is being dishonest in using these excuses, and at what point do you kind of move on to getting down to a payment arrangement because the excuses are not valid. So as I've urged you, these are the 10. You can see we kind of clumped some of them together. So there's the legal collections. There'll be the focus a lot on the one of the most popular ones, which is unemployment. We've listed right to the end, and then we'll work ourselves to the others that's also quite popular, which is affordability. So yes, hope you enjoy and feel free to give us feedback. Just bearing in mind, there's also a learner guide that's available to you that's at your disposal. And I hope you can take some good notes out of these sessions because there'll be a lot of information that we will be sharing with you. And you combine that with the information in the learner guide, you'll also be required to do a quiz on all of these courses. So just remember that you have to get 80% as a pass rate. So all the best and good luck. So let's talk about your journey in learning to deal with these excuses. And there's a nice quote: without knowledge, action is useless, and knowledge without action is futile. So you will be gaining a lot of knowledge, but you have to implement it. And that's, we'll try our best to get the information across to you as I've mentioned earlier on. But it's you need to go and study. You have to engage with us to ask questions, engage with your supervisor or your training department. But application is going to be critical and using it on a daily basis. I'll also would like to urge all the team leaders or supervisors to use it in your daily meetings. I know most companies would have 10-15 minute meetings with the team. So do some role plays where you use these excuses, and that's the only way we believe you'll get much more effective in dealing with these excuses. So yes, very, very important to consider that. So our first module will be on fraud. Again, I remind you, please reach out to us. There's a strong possibility while you're watching this module that there will be a facilitator on standby to answer some of your questions. Other than that, please just reach out to your team leaders to assist you. So, what are the learning outcomes for this module? So, by completing this model, you'll be able to first understand what fraud is and the various types of fraud. Understand the impact fraud has on its victims. That is very, very, very important. You'll learn later on that it's very, very difficult to prove fraud as it's the syndicates of highly sophisticated and very well resourced. So you probably will be dealing with many, many of the victims, but our fraudsters are very sophisticated that they can, because they have so much information of the of the debtors or the people that they have credit facilities. They often pass a lot of these kind of assessments that our clients actually implement. So just be mindful of that for that. But it's important for you as an agent to ask the appropriate questions to determine whether the debtor is actually bluffing, because there are quite a few of those. And then we'll also help you to convince debtors to pay their debt, regardless of the excuse. So it could be that they followed all the correct procedures that your clients may have, or that you may have if you're a credit provider, and the process is still, it's still being investigated, or let's call it, the allegation is still being investigated. So part of your focus is to always remind them that it's important while it's being investigated to kind of show their sincerity by continuously paying the account. Often when the investigations are completed and it's found that the victims are truly victims, the credit providers are very, very good at kind of sorting out their credit records and compensating them for any of the losses that they may have experienced. But I think that is a very, very important thing for us to be mindful of in terms of the learning outcomes. So please take note of that. So let's next talk about fraud in South Africa. The particular type of fraud that's quite prevalent is identity theft, and the losses in 2019 was in South Africa was close to 430 million rand. That's 2019. So we can just imagine how much it is at the time that we're doing this training. But it essentially a simple definition, as you can read there, is the act of intentionally deceiving someone for personal gain through false statements or actions. And that's kind of a very simple, rudimentary definition. Fraud is also one of the most challenging crimes to prove. And specifically in South Africa, there's a very specialized department of the South African Police Services that actually deal with this. And it's I think they're part of the commercial crimes unit. So yep. Um, I'm hoping that if you are a external debt collector, or if you're a credit provider, that there's significant investment has been made in your fraud department, so that that you can assist the police with these investigations. Because as I've mentioned to you earlier on, they are very highly and very well resourced. So very sophisticated syndicates, and often they only catch the guys right at the bottom, or what they also call these runners. So the more information you can gather, the more you educate debtors and consumers, the better. And in South Africa, like elsewhere, credit fraud is a criminal offense, and it often entails using someone's identity or their personal credentials to access or access either their accounts, or to borrow money using their credentials and identification. And this is where it really makes it actually more and more complicated. And for that reason, just be mindful of the fact that there will be a strong likelihood that you'll be speaking to the victim. And there's also a chance that the victim is not even aware that fraud was perpetrated by the use of the identification or any other means that we'll discuss much later on. I would like to talk you through some of the factors that you have to consider as an agent or team leader working in the collections environment in dealing with debtors that claim that they are victims of fraud. First of all, it is difficult to determine whether they are being honest, and we will talk through some of the processes that are available to them that can be used. But as I said, that's something that we have to really be mindful. Great. So a few things to consider. First of all, if you work for an external debt collection agency, most of your clients or credit providers start their collections quite early. So if they have made contact with the debtors, I'm not sure when you normally get the debt. It could be 90 days in early stage or late stage, 120 days, or you could be dealing with charged off debt. There's a strong possibility that your client should have made some sort of contact. And if you're working for a credit provider, there's also the possibility that your customer service guys would have made contact with them. So just be on the lookout and kind of just make sure you use your resources at your disposal, because that could give you an indication whether the debtor in this instance is truly and sincere about the claim that they're making or the excuse that they're coming up with. Also, because of the strict rules around, kind of investigating these issues and the possible losses that a debtor might suffer, or a credit grantor who's unsuspecting granted the credit to a fraudster, um, it's the possibility that that handover account where the debtor is already identified or kind of reported fraud is highly unlikely. So just think about those factors. Look, things do happen, and sometimes accounts could be handed over, or in fact, the debtor's still not aware. And this normally happens when the fraudsters actually took over their telephone numbers. So there might be instances where you are actually speaking to the actual fraudster, but just something to consider. So that's one point. And you need to consider all of these to determine whether they are legitimately actually a victim of fraud. Okay, and often you're going to have to make a judgment call. But let's look at the impact fraud has on its victims, and that we'll consider on the next slide. So next we'll talk about what the actual victims, true victims of fraud, actually, what they go through. It does have a major impact on them emotionally and physically. It causes a lot of distress in their families and their businesses because they have to. It's a loss that they're suffering. And as I've mentioned earlier on, often the credit grantors, credit providers will take up to 3 months to investigate it, and also due to the sophistication of the fraud, the various types of fraud, and the challenges that the that might take place in the South African police services. So it's a combination of a lot of um, issues or factors. So if you are collecting and somebody's claiming that they are victim of fraud, please just have a lot of empathy, especially it's the first time they've realized that they've just gone through this very painful process. Okay. Also, there's a negative impact on them financially and their reputations due to the losses that they will experience. They may have been have adverse listings on their accounts and negative credit records. So it's just understand that if it's a sincere victim, your conversation is not going to be fun. So just be aware of that and kind of put that in your memory bank. And as I said, it's an important kind of role for us to also be able to to play a role where we're empathetic and we guide them. But we still have to remain and keep our level of assertiveness and always be firm. Okay. Um, yeah. So if a victim is unable to prove it, then that debt burden becomes theirs and eventually our problem from a collections point of view. So I think always keep that in mind. Yes, and let's continue and look at all the impacts that fraud will have on its victims. So they will most likely be agitated, especially when they've reported the fraud to the credit providers, or if you're a credit provider and they've already kind of engaged with your respective fraud departments. And then on the flip side, fraudsters, with actual people that have committed the fraud, their level of agitation might be nothing. They just might want to ignore you and not take a call, but they're likely not going to engage with you. So just that's another way of kind of testing whether you're dealing with a true victim or not. So therefore, it's always to be knowledgeable to understand the various types of frauds, understand what they need to do to kind of start the process if they haven't kind of lodged the um, the the challenge with the various credit providers, and often they may not be aware how many credit providers the perpetrators have actually approached to access credit. So another piece of advice you could give them is to encourage them to get a credit report from the bureaus. Most of the bureaus do offer a credit report free, and a lot of the banks also offer that as an additional service, just to as a way of protecting themselves. So that will be some nice, good, sage advice that you can give them as credit providers or as a debt collector. In your reading material, we cover quite a bit of detail on the kind of popular types of credit fraud. Phishing scams, normally it's very sophisticated. They'll access the victims' emails and and as I've mentioned, it's quite sophisticated because they access some of your information stored on your laptops or any of your devices through these scams, where they get people to give them passwords or confidential information. So quite popular as well. Counterfeit credit cards, where people get the information normally stored on the back of your card, which is the magnetic strip. So these things normally happen in stores, in restaurants, when they do access the information on the back of the card. So often you would not know that because it's highly, highly sophisticated technology that they do use. And then the popular one in South Africa is identity theft, where they do kind of get access to your personal information, stolen from sometimes credit providers or other places where it is stored. So just be mindful of that. And it's often when they steal your driver's license or your identity documents, they would then open up credit facilities as quick as possible and see if they can access and then spend the money from that point of view. And then card not present. This type of fraud occurs when the cardholder are not in the actual card at the time of they doing the transaction is not the actual card of the debtor. And it's just another way where they actually get access to your information. They use your ID number to create it, and in fact, at the point of sale, your actual card wasn't there. So again, another kind of popular thing to be mindful of. Okay, and there are some useful factors to continue with and for you to consider that credit providers in South Africa would have dedicated pages, websites for debtors to report that. Once it's reported, they'll most likely give the debtor a reference number, and as I've mentioned earlier, they'll take up to 90 days to investigate it. What they'll also do is close cards, close your accounts. They will often ask the victims to get an affidavit from the nearest police station, and they would then issue new cards if it was a credit card or a retail card with new details on. Again, that's something to be mindful of. Um, um, Also, just as mentioned earlier, and then highly, if they have received a report of any fraud, they will not definitely not hand over the accounts. And there's something for you to consider, and that is accessing the or referring the victim, if you're convinced it is, to the South African Fraud Prevention Services, especially when the identities have been compromised or used to commit any fraud. And you can see there, there's their website, and on the website there is a place just for them to complete all the information. This is information, and that would be the place where normally all credit providers in South Africa are affiliated to. And they would kind of prevent future credit to be taken out, because there will be a special alert against the victim's name. Okay, but as you can see, it's a tedious process, and as you can see, complicated, and it's inconvenient. So you can have a very frustrated victim who's still liable until the investigation is completed. So that very tricky situation for you as a collector. It is clear that your knowledge on the subject is important. You'll not only attempt to figure out the sincerity of the so-called victim, because that is a very complicated process, but it's also your knowledge of the subject matter, and guiding them will also help the true victims kind of appreciate the service that you've offered them. Again, but I said it's often a flip of the coin due to the sophistication of the whole process, the syndicates involved and so forth and so on. So yeah, I like this quote by one of the founding fathers of the United States, Benjamin Franklin: by failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail. The more prepared you are, the more role plays you do, the more you kind of just not just get through the call and log a ticket somewhere for customer service to help you, the better you'll be at detecting when someone is actually truthful or not. I think that's just key, and please always bear that in mind as we go through this process. Okay, we've got some more useful factors that you should be considering. First of all, the debtor must report the crime. If they haven't by the time you call them, insist that they do, and there's a process they need to follow. Try not to own that process yourself. I know some companies would say, send us Form A or send us 10 affidavits and whatever that is. So they need to drive the process, because you're not the one that's going to suffer through the consequences, as mentioned earlier on. Okay. As also mentioned, there will be a thorough investigation, and companies are not just going to just kind of solve things overnight, because credit providers also stand the risk of losing if their systems or processes were compromised. But the credit providers, if found that the victims are really victims, will do their best to get their processes, to get the victims' systems and livelihoods back to normal. Be always helpful as far as possible. Guide them through the process if you do know it on your clients. And but again, I remind you, this is not an excuse for them to not pay you. Check in with your team leaders if they already established processes that you have. Obviously, in the training, we are suggesting strongly that the debtor need to own the process. And obviously, we'll discuss it in more details. Obviously, should you have any questions, and figure out. There's an example like what your processes are in your business. Check on your software if this has been reported in the past. The debtor did use this as an excuse, how long that has been. Um, um, make sure that you got all the contact numbers available so you can help the debtor in that regard. Remember, if possible, if identity theft has taken place, suggest that they contact SAFS. The information has been provided to you. And always remember, until the fraud has been proven and the investigations have been completed, the debtor is still liable for payment. Right, on this, we're going to cover now questions and some tips that we're going to give you, provide you, that can help you identify whether this excuse is authentic. and I'm trying to use some nice words, kind words to the debtors, that may be dishonest. So the art and science of asking questions is the source of all knowledge. So in your engagement with the debtor, ask questions and look at your software that you have available. Look at the history, and because just by asking the questions and not accepting any of the answers, it will help you figure out if they're being truthful or not. So, kind of the first tip you want to give you after the debtor raise fraud as an excuse for non-payment, use the following questions to help you assess if they are truthful or bluffing. Always assume that they are honest. Be empathetic yet firm in your approach and your tone. Okay, very important tips, guys. So, we're suggesting not necessarily a script, but just a guideline that you can use. So, for example, I'm really sorry to learn that you are a victim of fraud. And then we suggested you say, can you kind of advise me what fraud was perpetrated? Now, if somebody sincerely have reported, they would tell you they took my identity or somebody applied for debt that I wasn't aware of. So if they're giving you that kind of answers, they they would have most likely have engaged with our clients to report the fraud. So that kind of would lead you into asking more specific questions. When did it take place? So you can just look at the timing. Did they raise this as an excuse in the past? So that was very useful. And ask him, did you report the crime? Did you report it to the company that's now granted a loan or a card on your name? And if they said they have reported, then you can ask, please be so kind, please provide me with the reference number that you've been given. If they don't have the reference number, obviously, this will kind of indicate that there's a problem in their honesty. How long did the client say or the company say they'll be investigating? The investigation would take place. Did the credit provider collections department already contact you? Now, why that's important, I've mentioned earlier on that if someone is sincere, they would do everything possible to report this crime because of the negative impact on it. So if the collections department already contacted them, but they don't have a reference number, then that something is quite fishy about that. This debtor, obviously don't tell them that, but these questions will help you. Did the credit provider close the accounts or replace the accounts? And that would be standard practice to prevent further issues on the victim's account. So just be mindful of that practice. And if so, then the victim would then say yes, they did, and they've already closed it. So again, why, if it has been closed, why has it been handed over? So that's another question you need to just obviously consider. Did you report that the identity was stolen? If that's the case, to South African Fraud Prevention Services, and we've covered that already with you. Then also inform the debtor until the investigation has been complete, they may still be liable for the payment. Okay. Yes, Amok. If the debtor does not report the fraud, then we're going to then remind them of the risks. If they're refusing now, we're not going to go ahead. Again, that would be another indication that there's a problem here. Remind them of the impact emotionally and the physical distress I've mentioned earlier, the reputational. You've read all this in the earlier slide, and continuously you push to make that arrangement until the issue has been investigated thoroughly. Okay, we really hope that you've gained some new knowledge. Remember that you're going to have to still read your learner guide. Make sure you cover a lot of this in the role plays. And as I said to you, knowledge means, the quote that we've got earlier, knowledge means absolutely nothing if you don't apply what you've learned. So that is key, and we really hope that this information will help you become more and more effective. So all the best, and thank you for the opportunity. My name is Craig Null. Goodbye.